Hello guys, I hope you are doing well. It's once more the professor in the streets of St. Petersburg. So today we are doing a small walk and I want to talk about the cost of living in Russia because I received a lot of questions concerning the cost of living in Russia. A lot of people are interested in the cost of maybe food, in fact the cost of living in general. So the first thing I want to mention is that the cost of living in Russia in Eastern Europe in general is less expensive than the cost of living in the western part, meaning in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. The cost of living is it's not that expensive as compared to the cost of living maybe in England, France, all those western countries that are located in the west. So let us talk about the cost of living. For example, for accommodation in Russia is not that expensive. If you are coming as a student, for example, the accommodation is nothing. The accommodation as a student usually is in the dormitory, in the school dormitory. And how much is a school dormitory in Russia? The school dormitory in Russia is like 3,000 rubles, 4,000 rubles, depending on the city. For example, if it's in St. Petersburg, maybe you can go to 4,500, 5,000, depending on the city, but depending on the university. But if you are maybe not in Moscow, not in St. Petersburg, most of the time it will be like 3,000, 3,500, 2,000, 2,000 and 2,500 around the prices, rubles. And if you are going to talk about that in USD, it's around maybe 25 USD, 30 USD, something like that. So the cost of living will be very expensive as a student. That means that when you are coming as a student, you will first of all have a have less stress because you are not paying an expensive uh, accommodation. If you are coming maybe and you enter immediately in maybe you rent an apartment or a room outside of the dormitory, the cost is very high. It's high as compared to the dormitory. And if you are going to pay it yourself, maybe work to get to pay it, it will be very difficult for you because when you come, that doesn't mean you will find a job immediately. So that's one advantage of Russia is that you have the ability to rent in the dormitory, which is very expensive. Like those 3,500, 4,000 USD, this is one day of work, meaning you can work one day and you pay the dormitory. So to pay the dormitory is not usually a problem for a lot of people. It's not a problem to pay for the dormitory. You can work one day and pay for the dormitory. So for the accommodation part, the cost of accommodation here in Russia is very cheap. Now, if you are going to talk about accommodation outside the dormitory, usually here in Russia we have we have what we call studio, and we have apartment. If you are going to rent maybe a studio, maybe two people inside, maybe one for one person, you can rent a studio for here in Russia like for maybe 22,000 USD. Everything depends on the studio, of course. But let's say not too close to the center. A normal studio where two people can live is usually around 21, 22,000. And now with gas and electricity, you can go to 25,000. So usually a budget for a studio, for a normal studio, maybe uh 20 meters cube, uh 20 meters square. I mean 20 meters square. Uh, 20 meters square, 22 meters square, 23 meters square, something like that. In fact, around from maybe 18 to 23 meters square. Those studio are usually around 22,000 USD, 20,000 rubles. You can convert in, I don't know, on Google to find the price in USD. 20,000 rubles, and for plus electricity and gas, which is usually cheap here in Russia because in Russia, uh, in fact, Russia is the main producer of gas. So electric gas here is not that expensive. So usually you can round everything up and at 25,000 as a budget to get a normal studio here, which is not close to the center because if you are going to the center, things becomes very expensive. So accommodation is not expensive, gas is not that expensive, electricity too is not expensive, and the cost of studies is not also expensive. If you want to study medicine in Russia, you can get a university to study medicine like 3,000 USD, 2,500 USD, 2,500 USD, and you get a quality education as compared to other countries where if you want to study medicine it will be very very expensive. So that's it. So I think you have talked about everything because the cost of even the cost maybe for a taxi to get a taxi, the cost for transport, everything is less expensive in fact, and that's why the salaries here in Russia are also less than the salaries in other countries. Because when someone will ask me how much is the payment here in Russia, you take that payment and go and compare it maybe to the payment in other countries like US, Canada, not knowing that the cost of living is also very expensive as compared to Russia, where the cost of living is not that too expensive. So when you do comparison, you need to compare with the cost of living and with the salaries. Not only compare the salaries and think, no, they pay more than maybe here. You need to compare to the cost of living because some countries you get a lot of money, but you spend a lot of money too. So I think that's all for this video about the cost of living in Russia. The thing that you need to understand is that the cost of living in Russia is very low. You don't need much money. You can work your money if you live in a dormitory at the university. You can work your money and keep around 85% of your money. 85%. So that's it.